But if God is not omniscient, then he's not essentially omniscient. And if it's a defining feature of God's omniscience that he's essentially omniscient, then he doesn't exist.
Right.
So it seems to me that the problem, and maybe you will have to retract on the idea of that actual infinities can't exist. Or you'll have a different view about God's mind, maybe.
No, I don't.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the argument. So I just want to know what you guys think about
this. This
that.
has been dealt with extensively in the books of Kalam, actually.
Okay.
This actual question is...
Yes, so let's hear.
It's actually a good question.
Yes, I'm
actually.
interested.
So I'm going to answer you. Look, so the distinction between quantitative and qualitative has been made... Usually it's a bog standard answer that's given by William Lane Craig himself as well.
I've heard.
Actually, it's connected to the Kalam cosmological argument.
Yes.
Now, the thing is, what is actually problematic about the idea of an actual infinity in the real world?
Yes.
So if you look, for example, at Avicenna's account, and it's interesting, there's a lot of secondary source materials and stuff like that, and other people's account as well, Ibn Taymiyyah being one of them. They don't have a problem with the instantiation of an actual infinity in the real world. They only have a problem with the actual instantiation of the real world considering certain conditions, and I'll tell you what they are.
Okay. Yeah.
So, number one, the condition is that these things they occupy a space-time. And number two is that they coexist. Okay? Number three is that they're limited. Now, let me tell you again, right? That they're limited, they occupy space-time, and that they actually exist.
Right.
So, for example, many scholars of philosophy of religion, Aristotle believed this, Ibn Sina believed this, Ibn Taymiyyah believed this, many people believe this, Ibn Qayyim believed this, that there was actually an infinite regress of things. They didn't see it as an absurd, or they didn't believe it was, they connected it with the necessary being. The major differentiation that they put in place was the following. Look at this bottle, for example. This is limited. Would you agree? It's limited in its form.
In certain properties.
Yes,
sure. Physical properties.
Sure.
Yes.
So,
it's got a particular arrangement of matter.
So what they would say is that this bottle, which is contingent and limited and dependent, having an infinite amount of these bottles at the same time, okay, that is what would be impossible. Why would that be impossible? Okay. Because number one, they're limited. Number two, they're contingent. And number three, that they would have to coexist at the same time. So with these conditions in mind, you see, they would discount the idea of an actual infinity. They would say an actual infinity in these contexts wouldn't work. With God now,
yes,
he's not limited. So this is already a difference. He's not contingent. So you see, God is necessary, a necessary being by definition must exist, but even the attributes of the necessary being, for example, if they're omniscience, it must be necessary. Telazumi,
it's essential in any
right,
world.
But which means the idea of a quantitative infinity is not only not applicable to him.
Yes.
It's not applicable to him. Number two, it's something which is not applicable to anything necessary. So in other words, you see, the actual infinity is in the context of limited things which coexist at the same time and which are dependent and contingent. That's where the gripe is. It's not where the idea of as you phrased it, which is an actual infinity in the real world. That's why it's actually, we can believe an actual infinity in the real world only with the necessary existence. It's only an actual infinity in the real world with certain conditions which I just mentioned.
Yeah, no, okay, so, Snow, you wanted to go?
Yeah, so if you don't mind, so you said like the belief, God having a belief would mean that it's actualized in the real world.
No, what I'm saying, so what I'm saying is that you believe that God is a mind, right?
No, we don't.
God doesn't have beliefs. He doesn't have knowledge.
No, knowledge. Yes. Yeah, but
is God? So maybe I'm confused. Maybe is God a person?
So is he
an immaterial person?
Well, this will we want to.
The phraseology here. Yeah. Some would affirm that phraseology, some wouldn't. But
So we believe in God's transcendence, right? So using things like mind and person is something that doesn't really exist in our tradition, especially. A mind, yeah?
No, person.
A person, yeah, sorry. Regards a person with a mind, yeah?
Right.
That has subtle anthropomorphic connotations.
Right.
So we wouldn't really fixate on the term mind itself, right?
Okay.
That's the first thing. This is why I want to find out what do you mean by God's beliefs and why are you saying that this means that they are actualized? I want to unpack that.
No, I'm happy to. So my general understanding, and maybe we are talking across purposes, because the idea that I've always had of the sort of being that resonates for people, that is cashed out religiously, is the idea that people have a belief that God's looking out for them. He's essentially he's a person, and we are made in his image. And obviously God's not a finite person. Like I take it, you guys don't believe that. Yeah, he's transcendent, unlimited, unbounded, necessary, all of those sorts of things.
With the word unlimited, you have to connect it to an attribute of God, although it's unintelligible. Okay. So if you say unlimited in mercy, unlimited in power, unlimited in knowledge.
Superlative, knowing no bound.
Yes.
So what I'm saying is that I've always understood that when people pray to God, he can answer prayers.
Yes.
God knows the amount of hairs that are on Hamza's head, on your head.
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Even though I can't see what's on your head. But he knows what's going on with me and Mark, and these are distinct beliefs. And normally when we think about a justified true belief, we just go with JTB theory,
sure,
right?
sure.
Any claim of knowledge implies belief. Right? It's very hard to make sense of what you mean by God's omniscience if we're not talking about propositional knowledge.
Yeah, but my specific question is, so I could know how to address your point clearly,
Yeah.
because I don't want to straw man
No,
you,
no,
understand
that's
you.
right.
So when you say God having a belief,
Yeah.
and then God having a belief means it's somehow actualized in the real world, what do you mean by
Oh,
that?
okay, so
And
let's
how
go that.
and how can
So-
you demonstrate
okay,
that God
so-
has a belief, and by the very virtue he has a belief, it means it's actualized in the real
So
world.
when I say God's belief is real, I mean it in the same way that you think God is real.
No, but
God has. So in other words,
Yeah,
so
okay.
do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Can I go back one step, right?
Yeah.
I know what you're trying to say. You're
Yeah.
trying to say, listen, you have a problem with actual infinities. You're saying that God's attribute of knowledge must be actually infinite because it's connected to quantifiable things which have to, for example, his own
Yeah.
self. Let me make it easier for yourself. God's, if he's boundless, then he must know himself, right? So in other words, he must have
It's not quite what I'm. It's not quite.
no,
what I'm saying.
I know, but you're saying
Yeah.
that you have a problem. You're saying to me, you have a problem with actual infinities, right? And God's knowledge, you're saying God's knowledge, you
It's
claim
actually
is actually
infinite.
infinite. So
Yes.
I'm responding to you. I don't have a problem with actual infinity. I'm responding. This is my response.
Yes.
I don't have a problem even in the real world. Listen to what I'm saying. I can see it's logically not always incoherent. Can you see? I'm not going KCH.
Yeah.
Because what you're doing now is you're refuting William Lane Craig's Calanca's logic argument. I'm saying I accept what you're saying here. It's a strong point against the Calanca's logic argument. I grant you it. But what I'm saying is, this is the response. Listen to what I'm saying, please.
Yeah.
You might want to write this down.
No,
with all due respect.
I'm listening.
Which is this. I'm saying I have a problem with actual infinities in the certain context. Number one, that the objects of in question in actual infinities, number one, are contingent. Number two, are limited. Number three, exist all at the same time. That's the thing that every scholar of the medieval
So
period
can you
says.
explain to me? So I'm trying to understand.
Yes, okay, let me explain. Sorry, let me explain.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. So imagine God created A, then created B, then created C, and goes to infinity. That was Ibn Taymiyyah's view. That's a view in Islam. It's a view in Islam. Ibn Sina believed this.
Right.
Many people believe this. Aristotle believed this. Do you see what I'm saying? It's a view in the philosophy of religion. I'm not saying logically it's fully problematic.
Yeah.
I'm saying the following: saying if you get all those infinities at the same time, all those things A, B, C ad infinitum, and put them all at the same time, the existence of those contingent, limited existences together, that's where the contradiction lies. Why? Because therein lies the absurdities of the part being more than the whole, that the inexhaustible becomes the exhausted, all those things that I mentioned in the presentation. That's where it would be a problem, where the spatial, temporal, time dimension is one, i.e. they all coexist. Yes, all those things exist at the same time, number one. And number two, that they're limited and contingent. Do you understand what I'm saying?
No, I think I understand what you're saying.
I would like to finish my point, which echoes. So it's a little bit of a straw man to consider the qualitative versus the. What did you say I said in my book? I forgot now.
The qualitative and the distinction between qualitative and quantitative.
In the book, it actually goes a little bit further, and it echoes what Hijab is saying, Muhammed Hijab. It's more about the differentiated and undifferentiated infinite. This is the point. So it's based on temporal, spatial, discrete things, finite discrete things. So there is a fundamental difference. So we accept the actual infinite. We can accept it. But we don't accept it from the point of view that you can have an actual infinite that is based on differentiated things, which is based on the contingency, the limited nature. But I want to refer to God. So you say God. So God's knowledge. No scholar on earth will say God's knowledge is a differentiated, eternal, limited attribute from the point of view that it's temporal, spatial, and it has these limitations. And that's why I wanted to really find out what you meant by belief and how that actually denies what we're saying. I can't see that the argument that you propose actually is a defeater in this context.
So before you could I'll let you finish your point. We're going to quickly bring in.
Of course.
We're going to quickly bring in Dr. Chad Harris, and then we can continue this. with audience questions, perhaps on this point or other questions.
But he said he would answer my
I'm
question.
happy to. I don't mind.
Does he want to do that first?
On the human
I'll ask
rights,
this question
on the human rights.
extensively.
If you can manage that.
So,
please
do
go
you want me to just rephrase the question? Reframe the question.
About the objectivity.
Yeah. How would you? Because you mentioned deontological ethics and you mentioned consequentialist, the veil of ignorance of John Rawls. I'm just saying, what is the ontological, epistemological grounding that this is a morality on an objective level? That's all. That's my question. Yeah.
So the view that I would give maybe is slightly different to Mark, although Mark did mention it.
Yeah.
Which is that I think that a good way to ground an objective ethics is to look at the nature of suffering. So when an entity suffers, one of the things that they learn about the suffering, the actual nature of it, is that it has an axiological valence. So in other words, we learn about the axiological disvalue of suffering through knowledge by acquaintance, through our direct acquaintance with the state of suffering. And I think that that's, now we can cash that out in slightly different ways. I mean, some meta-ethicists will cash that out giving a reductive account. So some people will say, much like in the philosophy of mind, we want to reduce qualitative properties to neural states. Certain meta-ethicists think that it's appropriate to reduce suffering to the badness of suffering, the normative property, to sufferings. And I think that that's quite plausible. Another way of looking at it is to say that it's non-reductive. So in other words, that the normative property supervenes in a necessary way on the non-normative property of suffering. Another way is to look at it is a functionalist account. Now, all of those various accounts, they're very interesting in meta-ethics, but that's more an in-house debate amongst meta-ethicists. But once you grant that suffering is intrinsically bad, it may be instrumentally good in some cases, but once you grant that it's intrinsically bad, that generates a moral reason.
Yeah, but
okay, so if you can just, I promise you I'm going to get there. So once we have a moral reason that's amenable to rational understanding,
yes,
we can start to think about rights.
Okay.
Because once we recognize that there's an axiological disvalence or a negative axiological valence to suffering, we can see that that entity has an interest, a moral interest in not suffering.
Yeah, sure.
And that has a rational claim to have a right. And what is a right?
Yeah.
A right is a claim that an entity has to protect its vital interests. And one of the vital interests that it has is the interest in not suffering. Why? Because suffering is intrinsically bad.
Can I
so that's a way of generating.
This is the what someone will respond to that. Will say, listen, David Hume style. This is or fallacy, naturalistic fallacy. Because what you're saying is suffering you feel is bad, therefore it is bad from an ought perspective, don't do perspective, teleological perspective, moral perspective. The point is, I don't even grant you the premise that suffering is bad in the first place. Some suffering is good. We all go to the gym and suffer there. Listen, let me tell you something. All due respect, I don't even grant you the premise. We suffer all the time. As I mentioned before, I gave you a live example.
Yeah.
The people that were the good people in South Africa that went against the apartheid for so many years, decades, I'm sure you're one of them, you're a rights activist yourself, were suffering against the hegemonic power until they achieved their achievement. So I don't even grant the idea that suffering is bad. Listen, hold on.
Okay.
The point is, you saying that suffering, you feel bad, therefore it is bad, is a naturalistic fallacy. David Hume, who's an atheist himself, said you shouldn't be doing this. That's not grounding objective morality. So now ask the question again. How can you ground objective morality on suffering?
So one response to that is you've conflated the intrinsic versus the non-intrinsic nature of suffering. So in axiological theory, there's two distinctions, important category distinctions that are often made. One is about the intrinsic nature of the intrinsic value of something. The other one is the non-intrinsic. What you are referring to is a non-intrinsic value of suffering. So suffering is qua mental state. The state of being in pain is itself bad in and of itself. It may be extrinsically good in the sense that it helps you to overcome certain things. Like, for example, I can see Hamza likes to train as well, as do I. Really? We like to train in gym, right? So the instrumental value of suffering, we can grant that, right? It's a non-intrinsic value.
I understand what you're saying.
That's the intrinsic value.
One more thing. I think what you've done is conflated the psychological and the ethical. Like, for example, what you're saying is that we don't like pain. I agree with you, we don't like pain. Human beings don't like pain. Pain is bad, for the most part. I understand that, but what we're talking about here is a kind of psychological bad, not an ethical, teleological bad. I'm saying, how do you get from the psychological to the ethical? How are you making that jump?
There's another question I think would help this, because I would like to ask you, because I think you've slightly skipped something very important.
Go.
When we say objective, or when you say objective, what do you mean?
I mean,
because if you ground moral values in a naturalistic paradigm, or you ground moral values in what you would say intrinsic suffering, for example, How does that make it objective? Because my understanding of objective is that irrespective of the whole world, right? If they were to say that, for example, apartheid is right, we would still know it is wrong.
Yes.
Because moral values are out there, so to speak. So they require an ontological grounding. You have to answer two key ontological questions.
Yes.
Moral ontology.
Okay.
Number one, what is the source of this moral value,
Got it.
and what makes it mind independent?
Right. Got
What
it.
you've done. Actually, you've just gone round in
Right.
circles.
So I've got to respond to
Yeah,
that.
you have it. Yeah,
I've
so
got to
no,
respond.
but wait, one more, so you really understand what I'm trying to say,
I
because
get
this
it.
is philosophy, right?
Yeah, no, we're doing
You
it.
said naturalism explains everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So under what naturalistic account? If
Exactly.
naturalism is defined as
Exactly.
metaphysical naturalism is defined as.
Yes.
Number one, there is no divine. There is no non-physical,
Yeah,
and everything
right.
can be reduced to or explained by physical phenomena in some way. What you're doing, you're enchanting physical phenomena with some kind of divine attributes on non-physical features.
theories.
So from that point of view, you'd have to also define what physical properties are or what physical
Excuse me,
processes are,
gentlemen,
because from
sorry,
our understanding,
just a
they're
moment,
blind,
sorry,
cold,
sorry,
and non-rational.
sorry.
So how can you? So
I understand your